Sentry mode activated. Target acquired.
Hey there hunters, welcome back to the Gunners Guild, which, I guess I could still say that since Remnant is gun related, but I'm going to be continuing on my build a day program here with Remnant and the From Hell mod. Now before I dip into this build, I do want to discuss my past builds and kind of where I'm coming from, and my whole plan for, when I do these videos and why. So it's no surprise that the From Hell mod is difficult. It's called From Hell, and with all the items getting a fresh coat of paint, I thought it would be a good idea to give people build ideas for getting through this mod, as it can be overwhelming at times. I wanted to make builds that function in all aspects of the game, including dealing with mobs of enemies, as there are double adds now, even on boss fights. The builds also need to handle multiple elite enemies at a time, and sadly, a lot of builds can't. And of course, the build has to function well at dealing with bosses. All three of these are very different categories for the game, as a lot of weapons and builds either get overrun by adds and elites on the field, or can't handle the extra mobs and boss fights, or just take too damn long to kill anything, which makes the game more frustrating than it needs to be. So none of these builds have any actual specific boss killers, because those are typically very niche setups on a boss per boss basis, but I do have two planned in the near future. For now though, I do want to continue my general it gets the job done kind of builds here in the From Hell mod. And today's topic of discussion is going to be a build I like to call the Iskal Simp. Everyone knows I love Cessnia, and while trying to piece together builds to get through Hell Yaesha, which is a horrendous place by the way, I put this together, which was surprisingly fun and very effective at bossing and crowd control. So let's go over this build and show you how it functions. So here's the gear for the build, and at first you may think, oh, it's a summoner build, or why aren't you using summons in your primary weapon slot? Well, simply because I don't like summons. They don't draw enemy aggro, and they tend to miss targets on their hits, and that's not to say summons are bad, because they are actually pretty good, and they did get an HP buff in the From Hell mod, so they actually can survive much easier. They're just not my personal cup of tea. The build is revolving around the secret beetles though, which I guess are summons. They don't feel like summons though, just more like moving bombs. Now these little guys are very good at tracking down enemies, and they hit like a ton of bricks, getting upwards of 2 to 2.5k on a detonation. So I'm going to be building around these little guys. Labyrinth is the only armor that's actually good for us because it's just no strings attached mod power. Now for the amulet, I'm going to be going with Vulcan's detonator again. These secret beetles do actually explode, which causes them to do fire dots from Vulcan's detonator, and they do get the 25% more damage bonus, so it is better than Galenic Charm. The fire dots also help regen our mod power, which is just an added bonus. Sadly, Cryogen Blast does not work with beetles, or I'd be using that instead. The rings are your typical mod spam rings, where I have an Evoker Seal for the mod refund, and Burden of the Follower for more mod generation. You can swap out Evoker Seal for something more generic damage like Ring of Supremacy, or Burden of the Gambler, or something like that. We do want to spam these beetles a lot though, and trust me, we do get to spam them a lot, because Evokers is just kind of broken, because it does stack with Burden of the Follower, so you're getting double mod power back off this 10%, 15% refund with, lab armor and the Evoker Seal, and then that gets doubled, so you're getting huge amounts of mod power back. Now, while more damaging things like the Ring of the Supremacy and Spirit Stone do help our beetle damage, I feel like we're actually getting more DPS by having just more beetles to spam. And lastly, let's talk about the weapons. Now, I do prefer Ricochet Rifle for mod power builds, as each bounce generates mod power, which is nice, but you can use pretty much anything you want here. And for the primary weapon, which I've been avoiding all this time because it's just been looming there, is the Pride of Iskal. This gun did get buffed in the From Hell mod too, making its Vampiric Swarm mod actually do damage now, which is fantastic. Like, you can actually use this offensively and gain HP off of it now. The damage it does is enough to stagger small enemies, typically once while it's attached, effectively locking them down temporarily, and with our mod generation we can throw tons of these guys out. It acts as a very weak form of crowd control, and it does solid damage, and it regenerates life. It's amazing. So I'm using this because we're also running Vulcan's detonator, which makes the explosions from Pride of Iskal get 25% more damage, giving us just more primary weapon damage, and it does apply the dot, and so we have two forms of fire dots that also generate mod power per tick, so it's good for the upkeep. This build is honestly one of my favorite builds to play right now. It's very hectic, does solid damage, and has great survivability. There are two big negatives though. The main downside here is that we really don't have great bossing damage, as we're not abusing mechanics such as crit stacking or corrosion or freeze. There is a lot of damage potential going to waste here, to be perfectly honest. But as I mentioned before, these builds are more for general purpose gameplay that can effectively do everything. They're not just bossers. But it's not like this build is bad at bossing. It's really quite solid, as you can see. It's just not as strong as it could be compared to some builds that are designed around bossing, at least. Like, I could put Hive Cannon on and have my primary apply corrosion and have a solid dot, and it's still an explosive weapon for Vulcan's detonator. It'd be great. I just don't use it here because I love the added survivability from Pride of Iskal, and it feels much better to use to get through maps and all these elites and enemies and stuff compared to just Hive Cannon, because I hate reloading Hive Cannon. The other downside is that there is a ton of numbers flying on bosses. There's a lot of explosion effects, the bugs are everywhere. It all causes way too much clutter on the screen, and it can make it difficult to see enemies sometimes. Like, there are definitely a few times against like TN or Dream Eater that I just couldn't see the boss attacking because it was covered in bugs and fire and explosions, and then just damage numbers pouring out of it, and then he just hits me because I didn't see it wind up. I do have one other side note about the build though. I was using it specifically against some of the worst matchups I could find, like Jackal, Tien, Totem Father, and Ixalis. Basically just bosses that were up there and out of the way of beetles. And yeah, the build suffers super hard on those fights. I don't think it's even going to be viable on Ixalis. Every other boss though, solid. It's got good defense, good offense, loved it. I do want to try to rework this build though into like a crit version, because the Vampiric swarms actually do crit and they do hold up radiant armor. So I'm wondering if I can actually work them into like a radiant crit conversion build for some nasty damage, but that's a build pending over there. But that's basically all for me though. I just wanted to show you this build that I've been having an absolute blast with right now. I do appreciate you all for watching, and I still have a few other builds I was playing with that I'm going to put together in the next couple days. But that's it. Thanks and good luck out there, hunters.